19 seconds, that's all it took. A voicemail just 19 seconds long. Later, I'd play it over and over, sitting alone in the cold silence of my garage workshop. I knew every syllable by heart, the exact inflection, the arrogant little sigh at the end. But I kept hitting replay. That's the kind of thing an old structural engineer does, when his hands need something to keep busy, while his mind is still fumbling to make sense of the catastrophic failure of the world he thought he knew. 19 seconds. Long enough for a man almost 30 years younger than me to tell me to pack up my belongings and clear out of the house I'd paid to own, since before he was legally permitted to buy a beer. Walt, it's Marcus. Look, Bree and I talked it over, and this living situation just isn't working for us anymore. You're going to need to find your own place. We need the room. Then a click. No goodbye. Just the severing of a line. I was standing in my own driveway in Sacramento under the heavy timber carport I had poured the concrete for 20 years ago. And when I lowered the phone, I started to smile. Not a smile of amusement, but the cold smile of a man who realizes he has nothing left to lose. Because right then, the chains I had willingly wrapped around my own neck snapped. I was free. If you have ever been systematically pushed out of your own life by the people you would have died for, you will understand exactly why a grown man smiles at a moment of absolute betrayal. My name is Walter Hale. I'm 63 years old. For 34 years, I worked as a senior structural engineer here in the Sacramento Valley. My job was calculating invisible forces. I designed the load-bearing skeletons for highway overpasses and the children's hospital. I know exactly how weight moves through a building. I know how a steel beam that looks perfectly solid can carry a microscopic stress fracture, one you can't see until the very second it violently lets go. I understand stress. I know the exact mathematical moment a structure gets asked to bear more than it was ever built to hold. I arrogantly thought I understood human beings the same way. I was wrong. My daughter Bree was always the brightest thing in any room. Sharp, fiercely ambitious, and stubborn in a way that makes a father both incredibly proud and deeply exhausted. She got her marketing degree, landed a lucrative job doing brand strategy downtown, and was building what looked like a spectacular life. Then she met Marcus. It was at a backyard wedding in Folsom. 6 weeks later, she was calling me every other day, weaving his name into every sentence. I tried my hardest to be glad for her. When I met him, he had a firm, practiced handshake and an easy laugh, the exact kind of man who knows precisely how long a first impression needs to last before the mask slips. They married 14 months later. I thought it was dangerously fast, but I kept that to myself. That was my fatal mistake. Here is the part that still sits heavy in my chest. My wife Diane died in the fall of 2019. Ovarian cancer, it moved like a flash flood. 5 agonizing months from the first scan to her final breath. 31 years of marriage, and suddenly I was standing alone in a 4-bedroom house that felt constructed out of echoes. Bree was shattered. We grieved together that long, dark year. I'll be brutally honest. That shared, suffocating grief was the one pure thing that terrible season gave me. I held on to my daughter like a man clinging to a railing in a hurricane. Then, 6 months after Diane passed, Bree called me with a strained tightness in her voice. She and Marcus were drowning. His commercial landscaping company had bled out half of its major contracts, and her firm had frozen salaries. They were 3 months behind on rent. "Dad," she whispered, "could we stay with you?" Just for a little while. I said yes before she finished the question. At that exact moment, yes was the only acceptable answer. She was my little girl. I had 4 empty bedrooms, a robust pension, a fully paid-off house, and 0 reason to say no. What I couldn't have calculated was that a little while meant something completely different in Marcus's vocabulary than it did in mine. The first year was fine. Marcus scraped together a few new contracts and seemed to be clawing his business out of the grave. Bree worked remotely from the dining room table. We ate dinner together, and the quiet sounds of life pushed back against the crushing silence Diane had left behind. I let myself relax. I believed the foundation was holding. The second year is when the microfractures began to show. It started small. Marcus decided to rearrange the living room without asking. He shoved my leather reading chair into a dark corner and replaced it with his massive gaming recliner. A week later, he swapped out my drip coffee maker for a complicated espresso machine, leaving mine in the garage like trash. Then, he started parking his massive Ford F-250 dead center in the driveway, forcing me to crank my truck sideways into the mud just to squeeze in. None of it was worth a massive confrontation on its own. That is the insidious trick of a manipulator. They never give you one big reason to kick them out. They give you 1,000 tiny paper cuts. But it adds up, crack by microscopic crack. Bree changed too. She stopped treating me like a grieving father who had opened his sanctuary to her, and started treating me like a slightly inconvenient roommate who needed managing. She left passive-aggressive sticky notes about keeping the kitchen cleaner. She made sharp comments about my truck leaking oil onto the driveway, as if that concrete hadn't been secured by 26 years of my mortgage payments. I stood there, holding a yellow sticky note, and felt a dark sensation I couldn't name yet. I know its name now. It was the feeling of being slowly, deliberately erased in your own home. By the third year, Marcus had completely stopped pretending. He threw away the mask because he genuinely believed he had won. He worked only when he felt like it. His landscaping company existed on paper, but he let it shrink down to 3 or 4 low-maintenance clients. He spent most of his days sprawled on my living room couch, the television blasting sports highlights, while he sketched out massive, delusional business plans on legal pads that he never followed through on. Bree's paycheck from the marketing firm was carrying the two of them. But it was my roof, my soaring summer power bills, my high-speed internet, and my weekly grocery runs that were carrying absolutely everything else. One night, around 2 in the morning, I sat down at my drafting table in the garage and did the math. I calculated it exactly the way I had done load calculations my entire career, coldly, methodically. 4 years of free housing, 4 years of subsidized food, 4 years of utilities, property taxes, and maintenance. The final number came out somewhere north of $170,000. Neither of them had ever offered me a single cent. I wasn't keeping a ledger out of petty bitterness. I was logging it the exact same way an engineer logs a terrifying stress reading on a bridge support column. Quietly, waiting to see if the structure was going to stabilize or fail completely. The structural integrity began to buckle. The blatant disrespect started small enough for them to deny. One evening, Marcus had a buddy over for beers. With me sitting 12 feet away reading the paper, Marcus loudly told his friend that living with a stubborn old guy who set in his ways was a massive burden. He laughed a harsh, cruel bark. I didn't say a word, I just turned the page. Another time, Bree cornered me in the hallway and suggested, with a sickly sweet tone that made my blood run cold, that I should seriously start thinking about downsizing. "Dad," she sighed. "This big house is just a lot to keep up at your age. Maybe a condo would be safer." At my age, I was 62. I ran 5 miles 3 mornings a week. I had personally rebuilt the entire back deck the summer before Diane got sick. But sure, a lot to keep up. I swallowed the rage burning in my throat. I said nothing. If you have ever swallowed 100 small, agonizing disrespects to keep a fragile peace, telling yourself the toxic lie that love means absorbing endless abuse, I need you to hear me clearly right now. There is a massive, life-altering difference between patience and disappearance. I didn't know that yet, but then everything changed. I met Carol. It happened at an unromantic neighborhood association meeting. Carol had recently retired after 30 years of teaching high school English. She was fiercely intelligent, quick-witted, and completely unimpressed with her own opinions. We started with coffee, which turned into walks, which turned into hours-long dinners. For the first time since Diane's heart stopped beating, I felt like a living, breathing man. I told Bree about Carol on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I kept it simple. I mentioned I had been seeing someone, that it felt genuinely good, and that I was happy. Bree instantly set her coffee mug down with a sharp clack. She looked over at Marcus, who was leaning against the refrigerator. Something dark and unspoken passed between them, a current of pure, synchronized entitlement. "Dad," Bree said in a low, patronizing register, "I really think you need to slow down. You're still grieving, Mom. This just sounds like a desperate rebound. I kept my voice dead level. Your mother has been gone for 3 years, Bree. I would like to have Carol over for dinner this Friday. That is the exact second Marcus forcefully set his own coffee down. He crossed his arms over his chest, puffing himself up, and delivered the sentence that detonated the remaining foundation of my world. Yeah, Walt, I'm not really comfortable with that, Marcus sneered, his lip curling into a smirk of pure dominance. We live here too. We should have a say in who comes into our home. Our home. I want you to sit in silence with those 2 words. Our home. 4 agonizing years of subsidizing their existence. 4 years inside the fortress I had built my entire adult life around. And somewhere along the line, the parasitic word "our" had slithered in and completely rewritten the deed in everyone's twisted head but mine. Nobody had bothered to ask me. That is exactly how manipulators work. They don't seize your house with a weapon. They just casually start saying "our" and wait to see if you have the spine to correct them. I didn't correct him. I slowly picked up my truck keys, calmly stated I had errands to run, and walked out the front door. If that had been me 10 years earlier, I would have planted my feet and let 4 years of rotting words come roaring out. I would have made a scene I could never take back, but I didn't feel blinding anger. I felt something far colder, far sharper. I felt the chilling absolute quiet that washes over a seasoned engineer right before he solves a catastrophic problem he's been circling for months. I drove straight to Carol's apartment and unloaded everything. She listened exactly the way veteran teachers learn to listen all the way through. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes. She just asked, "So, Walter, what are you going to do?" "I don't know," I lied. Deep under that answer, I absolutely knew. I just wasn't ready to unleash hell out loud yet. I pulled back into my driveway around 10 o'clock that night. The house was dark. I walked straight out to my workshop in the garage and sat down at my heavy wooden bench. Sitting there was a quarter-scale wooden replica of the Sundial Bridge up in Reading, the very bridge. Diane and I had walked across on our final anniversary. My phone vibrated violently against the wood of voicemail. I pressed play. "Walt, it's Marcus. Look, Bree and I talked it over, and this living situation just isn't working for us anymore. You're going to need to find your own place. We need the room. 19 seconds. A smug, entitled squatter, serving an eviction notice to the landlord, who had kept him off the streets. No adult conversation, just a cowardly voicemail. I looked at the fragile, half-finished wooden bridge. I thought about massive structures. I thought about what holds, what shatters, and why. I thought about foundations that get arrogantly asked to carry exponentially more weight than they were ever poured to bear. Then I picked the phone back up. I didn't call Marcus. I called my attorney. His name is Raymond Ortiz. We had done aggressive property legal work together for 15 years. Because it was late, I left a brief voicemail. Raymond called me back exactly 7 minutes later. That tells you everything about how he operates when a high-net-worth client calls. "Raymond, I need to forcefully clarify my primary property situation," I stated, devoid of emotion. "It is highly time-sensitive. We need to move. We set an emergency meeting for 8:30 the next morning. I need you to understand something critical. People invariably assume what came next was a frantic, chaotic decision made in the blinding heat of anger. It absolutely wasn't. What was driving was something I had allowed to go completely silent for 4 long years. Self-respect. A terrifying reservoir of self-respect that I had foolishly filed away in a dark drawer. The shocking part that always leaves people speechless is that I had actually started quietly building the blueprint for this explosive demolition 2 entire years earlier. The very week after Marcus made his first casual, "our home" comment, I had quietly walked into Raymond's office for a routine estate review. I systematically updated my living trust. I forensically confirmed the property deed. I rigorously audited every single utility account and tax record to ensure they showed exactly one name. Mine, Walter Hale. I had been coldly watching the way this toxic situation was developing, and I did exactly what veteran structural engineers do when they observe a primary support beam starting to exhibit microfractures. I built redundancy. I strategically laid out alternate load paths, Anticipating the inevitable day, the main structure finally gave way. I prepared for war while they thought I was asleep. So, when Raymond and I sat down the next morning, I already knew the devastating answers. But I asked anyway, because a professional always checks his numbers. They have zero legal claim to the property, I stated. None, Raymond confirmed clinically. Sole ownership has been continuously and exclusively yours. No written lease agreement, no financial contribution. In the eyes of California property law, they are simply guests who have massively overstayed their welcome. He tapped his pen. They have some minor statutory protections. We will follow strict notice procedure. How fast do you want to drop the hammer? I want them out, I said coldly. 30 days written notice to vacate, served via certified mail. If they refuse to leave, we file an unlawful detainer. It will move violently fast. Draft it today, I commanded. I want it formally served by the end of this week. Set the holdover market rent at $3,000 a month if they try to stay a single day past the deadline. He nodded, making a sharp note. There's the other crucial liability, the co-signed commercial accounts. 3 years back, when Marcus's landscaping business was gasping for air, he desperately needed a co-signer on a commercial truck loan. $31,000 for an F-250, Bree had begged me, and like a fool, I said yes. A year after that, he needed a second loan for heavy equipment, another $16,000. The remaining balance hovered dangerously around $35,000. I want my name completely severed from those accounts, I said. Raymond made another note. It's legally possible under a change of circumstances argument. Since you are formally terminating the living arrangement and can legally document the severe estrangement, the commercial lenders have immediate grounds to reassess the risk. Marcus will have to qualify entirely on his own merit or find a replacement cosigner within days. He won't qualify, I stated flatly. His income is non-existent. Probably not, Raymond agreed. He looked at me for a long moment. Walter, I have to ask. This is your son-in-law. This is your only daughter. I held his gaze without blinking. My son-in-law left me a 19-second voicemail, ordering me to get out of the house I bought, with my own sweat. My daughter didn't bother to call and say she was sorry. Pull the trigger, Raymond. Raymond nodded slowly. Then let's begin the demolition. I packed my bags and voluntarily moved out of my own house that exact same week. Not because I legally had to, but because I desperately wanted to. Every single morning I woke up under that roof, I felt erased. They had spent 4 years methodically sanding my existence down to dust, until I felt like a ghost haunting the house, where I had built half the walls with my own bleeding hands. I rented a pristine 2-bedroom apartment up in Carmichael, 20 minutes away from the blast zone. I unpacked into a space that was entirely, unquestionably mine. I wanted to be clear of the fallout when the structure collapsed. The certified legal notice landed in Marcus's hands on a Friday afternoon. He signed for it himself. The courier service instantly sent a digital timestamp to my phone. By Saturday morning, I had 23 frantic missed calls. I was sitting at Carol's kitchen table, calmly drinking black coffee, when the 24th call lit up my screen. I finally answered. Marcus's voice sounded absolutely nothing like the smug voicemail he had left me. It sounded panicked, afraid. Walt, what the hell is this letter? He stammered. It is a formal 30-day legal notice to vacate the premises, I said steadily. Or to establish a rental agreement at the current market rate of $3,000 per month. You can't be serious. We live here. You can't just throw us out into the street. The county deed shows exactly one legal owner, Marcus. You have exactly 30 days. Either start paying market rent or find somewhere else to park your truck. There was a heavy, suffocating silence. Then his voice dropped into a vicious hiss. This is because of that woman. You're throwing your own family out for her. This is because you left me a 19-second voicemail telling me to leave my own house. I corrected him, slicing through his manipulation. I am simply choosing to formally respect your request. You wanted me out. I'm out now, so are you. I terminated the call. Bree called exactly 4 hours later. I let her talk all the way through, and it was sheer agony. She screamed that I was being vindictive, punishing her just for falling in love. And then she unleashed the ultimate weapon. Mom would be absolutely ashamed of you. She sobbed. That one landed clean, right between my ribs. It took every ounce of strength I possessed to remember what was actually true. In her final agonizing weeks, Diane had pulled me close and told me privately that she was terrified of the man Bree had chosen. She saw something deeply broken and parasitic in Marcus. She made me swear to stay close to Bree. Diane was never wrong about people. So, no, my wife would not have been ashamed of me. She had seen this catastrophic failure coming long before I ever did. Bree, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. I have loved you every single second of your life, but I need you to hear me clearly. Your husband left me a voicemail ordering me to vacate the home I've owned for 26 years. He didn't have the spine to look me in the eye, and you didn't call to apologize for him. You called today to aggressively defend him. That tells me exactly where I stand. I pray that changes, but until it does, the legal notice stands. I hung up the phone. It's funny. The things that suddenly become incredibly clear the exact moment you finally decide to stop being a victim. The next 2 weeks moved in a strange, suspended reality. Carol kept me grounded, Raymond kept me surgically informed, and Marcus and Bree predictably did absolutely nothing useful with the precious time they had been granted. They stubbornly refused to contact Raymond to negotiate a payment arrangement. They never seriously looked for an apartment. I knew this because Bree's oldest friend, Janelle, texted me in secret. She told me Bree honestly believed I was bluffing and would eventually cave. I was not going to cave. The structural collapse had already been initiated. On day 22 of the notice period, I drove back to the house to retrieve some of Diane's irreplaceable belongings. I had intentionally left behind a box of her favorite novels and her antique sewing basket. Marcus aggressively jerked the front door open. He looked like a man who hadn't slept a full night in 3 weeks. His eyes were bloodshot. I'm here for some personal items, I stated coldly. I will be exactly 20 minutes. Realizing he had zero leverage, he stepped aside. Walking inside, the house felt entirely different. It felt like it wasn't mine anymore. What had fundamentally changed was that I had completely stopped wanting it back. I gathered the heavy box and a framed photograph. As I was walking back down the hallway, Marcus suddenly appeared from the kitchen, blocking my path. We can't find anything we can afford on this kind of ridiculous notice, he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. 2-bedroom apartments around this area are going for $2,600 a month, plus deposits. We don't have that kind of cash just sitting around, Walt. I looked at him with eyes as dead and cold as concrete. I know exactly what apartments around here cost, Marcus. I own 4 of them. He visibly flinched. He thought I was just a tired old man with a pension. You have exactly 8 days left, I said softly. I strongly advise you to use them. On the final day of the legal notice period, they predictably refused to leave. The very next morning, Raymond ruthlessly filed the unlawful detainer with the county courthouse. The hearing came violently fast. Panicking, they hired a cocky, aggressive young lawyer from a tenant advocacy firm. In principle, that is noble work. It just becomes grotesque when weaponized to help too healthy. Entitled Adults Dodge Basic Accountability. The lawyer filed for a continuance on extreme hardship grounds. The court granted them 1 extra week. I wasn't worried. The math was already done. The final hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday morning. Bree and Marcus walked in 7 minutes before the session began. Bree wore a conservative gray dress. Marcus wore a cheap suit that fit him the exact way a suit fits, a man who almost never wears one uncomfortable and suffocating. I want to aggressively slow this part down for you. This exact moment was the apex. This was the catastrophic structural failure that 4 miserable years had been building toward, and I felt every single agonizing second of it stretch and snap. The judge was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s named Pruitt. She had the exhausted expression of a judge who had completely sorted this exact dispute into a neat category about 45 seconds after reading the case file. Raymond stood up and laid out our case with the brutal precision of a load analysis. He presented the deed. He presented 26 years of uninterrupted mortgage and tax payments in exactly one name. Then, he produced the thick, meticulously tabbed binders containing the full, forensic accounting of 4 years of subsidized housing costs. $170,000, Raymond stated clearly, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. Engineers absolutely love clean documentation. So, it turned out, did Judge Pruitt. I watched Bree's face closely while Raymond read that massive number out loud. A violent flicker of shock ripped across her features. I think it was the very first time she had ever been confronted with the true, staggering cost of the 4 years she had spent casually calling it their home. Her lips parted in horror. Their young attorney leapt up. He argued extreme hardship. He passionately argued that my daughter had an implied, intrinsic right to remain in her childhood home. He vehemently argued that the eviction notice was entirely retaliatory, a petty payback for a minor domestic argument over a new girlfriend. Raymond let him finish his theatrical performance. Then, he responded without raising his voice a single decibel. Your Honor, there is zero written agreement. There is zero financial contribution. Proper legal procedure has been executed to the absolute letter. Raymond paused, adjusting his glasses. Furthermore, if the court wishes to review the exact nature of this so-called minor domestic argument, I have both a certified transcript and the original audio of a voicemail in which the respondent, Marcus, explicitly instructed the legal owner to vacate the property. Their attorney froze dead in his tracks. They hadn't told him about the voicemail. Judge Pruitt slowly leaned forward over her bench. She locked eyes directly with Marcus. Did you leave such a message? The courtroom got terrifyingly quiet. Marcus's jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. I watched him realize, in real time, that there was absolutely no version of the truth that saved him. I was frustrated, Your Honor, Marcus stammered finally, shrinking under the judge's glare. I didn't mean it literally. You told the legal owner of the property to find somewhere else to live, Judge Pruitt said, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. And your legal position today is that the owner should not be permitted to act on your exact request. Silence. The heavy, crushing kind of silence that has actual physical weight to it. The court finds overwhelmingly for the petitioner, Judge Pruitt declared, slamming her gavel. The respondents have exactly 21 days to vacate the premises, or the sheriff's department will remove them by force. I heard the sound Bree made. It was the desperate, gasping sound of someone whose entire understanding of how the universe worked had just violently rearranged itself without their permission. Marcus's face went completely flat and dead, the exact way a face goes when the performance is finally over. The curtain has dropped, and there is absolutely nothing left to perform. And me? I didn't feel a surge of malicious triumph. I felt the exact way you feel when you finally take a massive, crushing weight off a steel beam that has been groaning in agony for years. Just pure, clean relief. Outside the courthouse, standing in the thin, biting February sunlight, Raymond shook my hand firmly. So, he asked, zipping his briefcase, what's the next move? I'm selling it, I replied without hesitation. I had made that brutal decision 2 weeks earlier. Not because I desperately needed the money, but because I violently refused to live one more single night in a structure that held 4 years of being treated like a massive inconvenience. I wanted to raise the site and start entirely clean. The listing went up that very week. I priced it aggressively at $760,000. Within 6 days, I had 3 competing offers. I mercilessly took the highest one. $785,000. All cash, 30-day close. The buyers were an energetic young family relocating from Portland. They struck me instantly as people who would fill that empty house with the right kind of noise. Meanwhile, the demolition of Marcus's financial life had been moving in parallel. I had filed the formal withdrawal paperwork with both commercial lenders 2 weeks before the court date. The massive truck loan cleared my name in 9 business days. The heavy equipment loan took 3 days longer. Both banks instantly sent Marcus certified legal letters stating that, due to the severe change in co-signer circumstances, his commercial accounts were under aggressive review. The full, staggering $35,000 balances would come due immediately if he couldn't legally qualify on his own merit. He couldn't qualify, not even close. His income had been an absolute disaster for years. Without my pristine credit score propping him up, every single financial metric failed spectacularly. And there was absolutely nobody else in his shallow life with both the stellar credit and the sheer stupidity to take on $35,000 in joint, high-risk debt. The commercial Ford F-250, the massive truck he had aggressively used to block my driveway, was brutally repossessed on a rainy Thursday morning. Carol saw the dramatic repossession notice on a neighborhood watch app. She showed me her phone with a careful, probing look. I was more than okay. I was liberated. They finally hauled their trash out of the old house on day 21, hours before the sheriff was scheduled to arrive. The ruthless property manager I had hired executed the final walkthrough that afternoon. The report was sickening, but expected. Damaged interior doors violently kicked off their hinges. A massive hole punched straight through the drywall of the master closet. Deep, malicious gouges carved directly into the original hardwood damage that looked exactly like heavy furniture had been deliberately dragged with nails exposed. The total repair bill ran slightly over $11,000. I didn't blink. I immediately filed a devastating civil damages lawsuit and attached a police report for vandalism. It was just one more heavy thread in a suffocating fabric of legal and financial consequences Marcus was slowly, agonizingly learning he would have to wear for the rest of his life. The cash sale closed effortlessly. In early spring, the net cash wired to my account came to a little over $600,000. I bought a beautiful smaller place out in Winters, a quiet, sprawling town Diane and I had always loved. 2 bedrooms, a massive, fully detached workshop, and a wide back porch that faces due west toward a breathtaking stand of ancient oak trees. I moved in late that spring. The very first thing I carefully hung on the workshop wall was the wooden bridge. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Bree, I answered. Her voice was quieter, more broken than I had heard it in years. The arrogant, entitled hardness had been completely sanded away. "Dad, it's me, I know," I said softly. "We're in a tiny apartment in North Highlands," she whispered, her voice trembling. It's fine, we're fine." A long, heavy pause. "Marcus lost the rest of his contracts without the truck. He's looking for hourly work. I'm not calling to ask for money, Dad, or anything." I waited. As an engineer, I have learned the devastating power of simply waiting in silence. "I've been thinking constantly about what you said outside the courtroom," she choked out, fighting back a sob. "About how I didn't call to apologize. You were absolutely right. I should have called you the exact night he left that disgusting voicemail. I should have screamed at him, told him he was dead wrong, and begged for your forgiveness. I didn't. I've been talking to a therapist about it. Anyway, I just wanted to say it out loud. I'm so deeply sorry for at least that much, And right there, in those 5 words, is exactly how I knew she actually meant it. A fake strategic apology from a manipulator refuses to admit how much damage is still left unsaid. Only an honest, shattered apology does. "Thank you, Bree," I said, the tightness in my chest finally releasing. "That means something. Are you okay, Dad? Are you happy?" I looked out the massive workshop window at the ancient oaks. A red-tailed hawk was effortlessly riding a thermal current. Carol was driving over later to make dinner. The wooden bridge was exactly 3 weeks away from being perfectly finished. "I am," I said. "For the first time in a very, very long time, I really am." The quiet that followed wasn't cold or hostile. It was the heavy, profound quiet that means someone is finally sitting with a true thing they hadn't expected to hear. "I'm glad," she whispered, and I truly believed her. We didn't make grand plans. We didn't promise forced weekly phone calls. I simply told her she could reach me at this number whenever she was genuinely ready to be a daughter again. And she said okay. We hung up. I stood in that sunlit workshop for a long time after that. And here is exactly what I want to leave you with today. This entire nightmare taught me that a structure that has been brutally compromised doesn't always have to be completely demolished. Sometimes you can shore it up You can reinforce the weak sections. You can build entirely new load paths around the massive damage, and you end up with something infinitely more honest than what was there before. The fatal mistake most people make, the exact mistake I foolishly made for 4 agonizing years, is confusing love with disappearance. I repeatedly told myself that being a good father meant silently absorbing every single small disrespect without a word of complaint. I told myself that patience had absolutely no bottom. It doesn't. Kindness is not weakness, and patience is not a standing invitation to be relentlessly used. There is zero version of love that requires you to accept being completely erased from your own life. The most ethical, powerful thing I did in this entire nightmare wasn't serving the eviction notice or selling the house. It was the exact moment I violently refused to keep pretending. Because pretending wasn't protecting anyone. It was just delaying the inevitable day of reckoning, and cowardly calling that delay love. So, find the one disrespect you have been desperately telling yourself doesn't matter. Find the small toxic displacement you keep silently absorbing, just to keep the peace. And say its real name out loud. Naming the poison is where the cure begins. And then, sit with this terrifying question. If someone you love has been quietly, methodically teaching you that you do not matter, is protecting their comfort really love, or is it just raw, pathetic fear wearing love's coat? I would really love to know where you stand on all this. Do you think Walter did the right thing by dropping the hammer? Drop a 1 in the comments if you stand with him. If you think he went way too far, drop a 2. And if you think he didn't go far enough to punish Marcus, drop a 3. I read every single one of your comments. While you're down there, tell me exactly where in the world you are watching from. It absolutely amazes me to think about all of us, scattered across the globe, sitting in the dark with the exact same questions. If this story moved you, if it sparked something in your chest, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I tell these stories because I deeply believe the quiet ones. The stories about dignity, retribution, and the slow, brutal courage it takes to reclaim your life are the ones we need the most right now. I would be honored to have you back for the next one. Stick around, there's a lot more coming. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.